So the story of my talk today, or the theme I should say, is changing the world by challenging yourself. And I hope by the end of this talk you'll understand why. So last year, I embarked on an eco-expedition to Sulawesi, Indonesia. And personally, I love to travel. I'm always seeking new experiences, and I love immersing myself in different cultures. But this trip in particular was probably, for me, one that will go down as one of the most memorable of my life. And today I'd like to share with you why. Sulawesi. It's an interestingly shaped Indonesian island just east of Borneo. And it's surrounded by very deep seas, which means that even during the ice ages, when the world's sea levels were much lower, Sulawesi remained an island, and it never connected to other land masses. Consequently, what that means is that animal migration was rendered impossible. What that means over time is that for centuries, the species of life on Sulawesi have come to evolve independently and uniquely, and scientifically we call that being endemic. And as a result, that also makes Sulawesi an absolutely perfect place for ecological exploration. So the trip I was on was divided into two sections, 1 week in the jungle and 1 week at a marine site. First, in the jungle. There, myself and the rest of the expedition members stayed at a campsite, which was a muddy 4-hour trek away from civilization. There were no roads, no electricity, no signal, no running taps, and no toilets, and that was probably the hardest part for me. Everyone at the campsite, which was about 40 people, we all pooped into one big trench, and after a week, there was no longer a trench. There, I was immersed into the wild, which is something not many of us urban dwellers ever get to do. There, I became a research assistant. I worked with a bunch of other passionate and knowledgeable scientists who were extremely well educated in their own respective fields. On site, we had a herpetologist, someone who studies reptiles and amphibians. We had a bat scientist, butterfly scientist, bird specialist, and more. This is what our... Oh, it's missing a slide. There it is. This is what our schedule looked like every day, and you can't quite see very clearly, but what this is basically a list of all the events that we went on. So every day, we would go out into the jungle, and we'd collect data, and we'd survey the habitat. We collected data about bat populations, butterfly populations, bird populations, etc. Here are a few photos that I took. Every day, we received these lectures about the local environment and ecosystem of Sulawesi. We learned how to estimate distances. We memorized the bird calls of different species. And we also learned how to track megafauna like wild cows and pigs. On the top right corner, you actually see a footprint of a wild pig that we were tracking in the middle of the Sulawesi jungle. After 1 week of being in the jungle, our next destination was the marine site. There, those of us who never had scuba diving experience, we worked for our open water diving certification. And those of us who did have diving experience, we got our advanced diving certs. And like in the jungle, there we also received lectures about the local coral reef ecosystem and marine system of Sulawesi. We learned how to conduct transect surveys of fish, invertebrates, and benthos, which is the sea bed. And then we went out onto the corals to actually collect data. And these are some of the cool photos that we took underwater in some of our dives. However, despite all the magnificent creatures that we saw and the beautiful, healthy environment that I was fortunate enough to be in, there was a serious and, quite frankly, tragic undertone, because I knew the reason I was there was to help preserve the health of a deteriorating ecosystem. And I'm sure we all know the story of climate change and human environmental impacts: soil degradation, air pollution, water pollution, habitat fragmentation, surface albedo decrease. These are just a few. The list goes on. Let me give you a few numbers. On average, the world's glaciers have thinned by about 10 meters since 1980. And since the Industrial Revolution, ocean acidity levels have increased by 30%. I could stand here and continue to recite statistics, but this trip allowed me to experience the impact of human environmental implications on a significantly more personal level, and I'd like to share with you that instead. What you're seeing here are turtle eggs at a fish market in Indonesia, and that should be grim news because turtles, in general, are a very endangered species. The fact that we saw turtle eggs at a local fish market in Indonesia suggests that we as humans are hunting the root of the turtle population. So, at the same time, we're also hunting the turtles themselves, which makes me wonder, how can the population of turtles bounce back when we're cutting them off at the root? Here's another slightly darker photo. And at first, you might think they're shark fins. They're actually manta ray fins, another severely threatened species. Seeing these incredibly beautiful and elegant species, which I swam alongside with in the water, butchered like that on land, angered me very deeply. But at the same time, I'm also glad to have witnessed it, because now I have seen the roots of animal endangerment for myself, and I can tell the story from a personal viewpoint. On the bright side of things, there is a plethora of ways through which you can help combat this issue. Awareness, the first step. If no one understands the issue, no one will solve the issue. And what I'm doing today is trying to precisely raise awareness. The next is involvement, action. If every human being, all 7,500,000,000 of us, contributed even slightly to this cause, we'd be seeing immensely better results. And there seems to be this preconception that something of such a large scale as global warming requires an equally large campaign or project to combat it. I don't think that is necessarily the case. In fact, I think the key to combating and even reversing climate change lies within the individual, each and every one of us. So what can you do? How can you start? Well, you can start today. You can start by reusing plastic bags when you're buying groceries, not using straws when you don't need to, saving that 5 minutes in the car by taking a walk, reducing your meat intake, boycotting products that contain palm oil. These are just a few small actions amongst a plethora of other ways. But the point is for us to become aware of the environmental effects of these small actions. Saving that 5 minutes in the car, do that every day for about a year, and you'll save gallons of oil. Reduce your meat consumption. 1 kilogram of beef is estimated to consume about 15,000 liters of water. Save, say, 10 kilograms of beef a year, and you would have saved 150,000 liters of water. Now imagine if every human being, all 7,500,000,000 people, did just that. You could be a part of it. And now you might be thinking, well, what can an individual do? Your actions might feel insignificant, and yes, that's true, but that's the exact mentality that prevents action, and that's the exact mentality that prevents progress, because if everybody thinks that way, no one will act. So it starts with you, and then with the people around you. You can't change the world without changing yourself first. So I mentioned near the beginning of this talk that this trip will probably go down as one of the most memorable of my life, and it relates to this notion of thrusting yourself into unfamiliar and uncomfortable environments. For me, embarking on this trip was doing just that. There are so many reasons for why this trip was so special for me, and that involves the place that I went to, the people I met, the things I learned. Rather than comfort traveling, I camped in the middle of a jungle so remote. Had I been bitten by a venomous snake, I would not get to civilization soon enough to receive antidotes. I was fortunate enough to dive at a reef that is still healthy, where I swam alongside beautiful creatures that I only see photos of in the classroom. I formed a camaraderie with my other expedition members and formed friendships. I met passionate scientists who all carry equally interesting stories about their adventures to other remote parts of the world. And these scientists are some of the most passionate people that I've ever met. And you could tell just by the way they were interacting with wildlife and their surroundings that they really loved what they were doing, and I admired that a lot. And finally, I learned so much. I learned about all the ways our planet is dying. I was motivated to take action. I was angered by the lack of respect of those who choose to neglect our environment. And perhaps it's not as much content as a biology textbook, for example. But I learned in such a way that cannot be replicated in a classroom. By actually being out there in the world, I was feeling, hearing, seeing, and smelling what I was learning about. So I think what made this trip so special for me was that it was wildly different and thus unfamiliar. And as human beings, we tend to fear the unfamiliar, and there are good evolutionary reasons for that. It's easy to be satisfied with what we have and therefore stay in what we call our comfort zones. But do you plan on staying there forever? I sure don't, and I hope you don't as well, because I truly believe that the best stories aren't written inside a room, but rather outside it, where crazy, unexpected things happen to make your story all the more exciting. So, on our last day at the marine site, before our long journey back to Hong Kong, I was speaking with the head scientist there, and he told me every day about 200 species of life go extinct, which is 1,000 times the rate it should be. Since the start of this talk, one species has gone extinct. So that day, I made him a promise. I promised him that I would play a role in educating and motivating the next and quite possibly the last generation of human beings that can still save the environment. And that is what I hope to have ultimately accomplished today. I hope you now understand that small, individual scale action is still action, and collectively we can alter humanity's current course. At the same time, I hope to have inspired you to challenge yourself and put yourself in uncomfortable and unfamiliar environments. With the two together, you're bound to make positive change for both yourself and your world. So I'd like to leave you with a challenge. I challenge you to thrust yourself into uncomfortable environments. I challenge you to throw yourself out there, seek discomfort, seek adrenaline, and seek adventure. In the process, you will undergo personal growth and hopefully also play a part in preserving the health of our beautiful natural world. Thank you.